Tides of Love. Chapter 1. Return to the island. The thick, humid air hit Clara like a wave as soon as she stepped off the small ferry. The scent of salt water clung to her clothes, mixing with the faint aroma of marsh grass and distant pines. She stood for a moment, suitcase in hand, feeling the uneven wooden dock creak beneath her. The island hadn't changed, not in all the years she had spent trying to forget it. Its stubborn familiarity both comforted and unsettled her. Above her, the sky was heavy with gray clouds, casting the lowland in a muted light. The air was still, but the sea murmured against the shore, a constant reminder of the unrelenting passage of time. Clara's eyes drifted to the sprawling trees along the dirt path leading to the house. Spanish moss hung from their branches like a veil, swaying gently as though whispering old secrets only the island could keep. She adjusted her grip on the worn leather handle of her suitcase, feeling the weight of it, though it was not as heavy as the thoughts that filled her mind. The flight from Chicago had been suffocating, a race away from the failure she had not been ready to confront. Losing her job was a wound, still fresh and raw, but one that seemed less important now, standing on this island that held its own scars. The narrow road stretched before her, framed by the wild growth of summer. Ferns and palms peeked out from beneath the trees, and every step she took sent small creatures darting into the underbrush. The heat clung to her skin, a stark contrast to the cool, clinical halls of the office she had left behind. The house came into view, the familiar two-story structure tucked among the trees like a relic from another life. It was an old farmhouse, the paint peeling from years of neglect, yet it still stood proudly, refusing to surrender to the encroaching wilderness. The porch sagged slightly, and the windows were dark, offering no hint of what lay inside. Clara paused at the edge of the clearing, her gaze lingering on the house. Memories she had worked so hard to bury began to rise, unbidden and insistent. Summers spent running barefoot through the fields, her father's laughter booming through the open windows, and the nights filled with her mother's soft humming as she sat on the porch, watching the stars. But those days were gone, swept away like sand on the shore. The laughter had faded long before Clara left, and the house had grown quieter, more haunted by unspoken words and things left undone. She forced herself forward, her footsteps steady, though her heart raced. The door was unlocked, as it always had been. Pushing it open, Clara was greeted by the cool, stale air of a house long forgotten by time. The wooden floor creaked beneath her as she stepped inside, the sound echoing through the empty rooms. Dust motes danced in the streams of light filtering through the cracked blinds. The furniture remained as it had been, untouched, a living room frozen in place. Her eyes scanned the space, taking in the small details: frayed rugs, mismatched chairs, a weathered piano in the corner. Everything was familiar, yet distant, as though it belonged to someone else. Clara set her suitcase down beside the staircase and turned toward the back of the house, where she knew her mother would be. The smell of something faintly sweet hung in the air, guiding her through the narrow hallway to the kitchen. There, she saw her mother. Christine stood by the window, her thin frame illuminated by the soft light filtering in. She was older now, much older than Clara remembered. Her once vibrant hair had turned to a dull silver, and her posture was slightly hunched, as if the weight of the years had finally caught up with her. Yet, there was a calmness in the way she moved, a quiet acceptance that came from living on the island for so long. Clara watched her mother for a moment, feeling the tug of emotions she couldn't name. It was strange to see her like this, fragile and yet so rooted in the place that had been both their home and their prison. Christine turned, and their eyes met. There was no need for words. Clara crossed the kitchen, her step soft, and placed her hand on the worn wood of the table. The island, the house, and her mother. All of it was still here, waiting for her return, just as it had always been. And though she had only planned to stay for a few days, Clara knew in that moment that the island would not let her leave so easily. Chapter 2. The Weight of Home. The house breathed quietly around Clara, its old bones groaning with the passing of time. She stood in the center of the living room, gazing at the walls lined with family photographs, framed memories that clung to the past. Faces frozen in time stared back at her. Her father, broad-shouldered and beaming in one. Her mother youthful and glowing in another. Clara was in some of the pictures too, a younger version of herself, filled with the kind of carefree energy she could barely remember possessing. The silence in the house was profound, almost oppressive. It pressed against her like the humid air outside, making her chest feel tight. The island had a way of doing that, of swallowing sound until all that was left were the whispers of the wind and the low hum of the sea. Her eyes traveled across the room, landing on the old armchair where her father used to sit, a book always in hand, even as he dozed off. Clara had never dared sit in it as a child, not out of fear, but out of reverence. The chair had been his throne, a place that belonged to him alone. Now, it sat empty, the cushion flattened and worn from years of use. She crossed the room slowly, her hand brushing the back of the chair as she passed, feeling the rough fabric beneath her fingertips. The house was full of these quiet remnants of her father. His tools still hanging in the shed, his fishing gear tucked away in the corner of the mudroom. Each object was like a ghost, a reminder of the man he had been before everything changed. Clara made her way to the back door and stepped outside, onto the small porch overlooking the marsh. The vast expanse of green stretched out before her, punctuated by winding creeks that gleamed under the overcast sky. The water moved lazily, thick with life, as herons and egrets waded through the shallows, searching for their next meal. Beyond the marsh, the distant ocean lay hidden, but its presence was undeniable. The salty tang in the air was a constant reminder of its nearness, a boundary between the island and the rest of the world. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the nearby trees and sending ripples across the surface of the water. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the familiar sounds wash over her. She had spent so many summers here, running barefoot through the marsh, her legs streaked with mud as she chased after crabs and minnows. It had been a different time then, a simpler one, before the cracks in her family's foundation had begun to show. She opened her eyes again, her gaze drifting to the side of the porch where an old wooden swing still hung from rusty chains. The swing had been her mother's favorite spot in the evenings. Christine would sit there for hours, swaying gently as the sky turned pink and orange with the setting sun, her thoughts as endless as the horizon. Clara had often joined her, though they rarely spoke during those moments. There had been a quiet understanding between them, a shared appreciation for the peace the island offered. Now, as Clara looked at the swing, she could see that the chains were worn, the wood weathered and splintered. It was a reminder of how much time had passed since she had last been here, how much she had chosen to forget. The tension she had felt since arriving weighed heavy on her shoulders, the unspoken words between her and her mother lingering in the air like an unfinished sentence. She had come here to escape the mess her life had become, but standing on this porch, looking out over the marsh, she realized there was no escaping the island's pull. It was as much a part of her as the blood in her veins. She turned back toward the house, her footsteps soft on the wooden planks. The kitchen was empty now, her mother having retreated to another room, likely to rest. Christine's illness was a shadow that loomed over everything, even if it had yet to be fully acknowledged. Clara knew, deep down, that there were only so many summers left, only so many chances to bridge the distance that had grown between them. Inside, the house felt colder, the warmth of the outside world blocked by the old, thick walls. Clara moved through the hallway, past the closed door of her mother's room, and up the stairs. The steps creaked beneath her weight, each one a reminder of how fragile everything felt. At the top of the stairs, she paused outside her childhood bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and she pushed it open with a soft nudge. The room was exactly as she had left it, as though time had stopped the day she had packed her bags and fled to Chicago. The bed was neatly made, the walls still adorned with the posters and pictures she had hung in her teenage years. Books lined the shelves, gathering dust, and the window was cracked open, letting in a faint breeze. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping beneath her. She could feel the weight of the years pressing down on her, the weight of everything she had left behind. Her fingers traced the quilt, the one her grandmother had made, the one she had wrapped herself in during long summer nights when the thunderstorms rolled in off the ocean. The room smelled faintly of lavender, the scent of her childhood. It clung to the air, a subtle reminder of the life she had once known, and the life she had tried to forget. She leaned back, her eyes closing as the exhaustion of the day settled over her. The island was quiet, but its silence spoke volumes, and Clara knew that the weight of home was something she could no longer ignore. Chapter 3: Memories of the Past. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of Clara's childhood bedroom, casting delicate patterns on the wooden floor. She awoke slowly, the unfamiliar softness of the bed reminding her that she wasn't in Chicago anymore. For a moment, as her eyes fluttered open, she had forgotten where she was. But the familiar smell of salt air, mixed with the faint scent of lavender, quickly pulled her back to the island. She lay still for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks that had formed over the years. They seemed like veins running through the plaster, as though the house itself had aged along with the people who once filled its rooms. It was strange how little had changed, yet everything felt different. The silence of the house was punctuated only by the occasional creak of the floorboards, the soft rustling of leaves outside, and the distant sound of the ocean, a constant reminder of the life that existed beyond the marsh. Clara sat up and glanced around the room. Everything was frozen in time. The bookshelves still held the same well-worn paperbacks, the dresser was cluttered with trinkets and forgotten jewelry, and the faded posters on the walls were relics of a girl who no longer existed. She reached out, running her fingers along the edge of her desk, remembering the hours she had spent there, writing in journals, sketching plans for a future that felt endless and far away. Her eyes landed on a small, framed photograph on the nightstand, its edges slightly curled from age. In the picture, a younger version of herself stood beside her father, their arms wrapped around each other, both grinning at the camera. They were on the beach, the wind whipping through their hair, the sea stretching out behind them in infinite blue. Clara could still hear her father's laughter in her mind, deep and warm, the kind that made everything seem okay, even when it wasn't. She picked up the photo, her thumb brushing lightly over the glass, as if the simple touch could pull her back into that moment, back to a time when things were easier, when she didn't have to confront the complexities of life, the weight of loss, or the strain of her relationship with her mother. Her father had been her anchor on this island. He was the reason the summers here had once felt like an adventure, rather than a burden. He was the one who had taken her fishing at dawn, taught her how to sail in the small boat tied up at the dock, and told her stories about the creatures that lived in the marsh, the ones he swore only came out at night. He was the one who had made this place feel like home, but all of that had changed. The summers had grown quieter, the adventures fewer. As her father's health declined, the house had become a place of tension, filled with whispered conversations and things left unsaid. Clara remembered the way her mother had begun to withdraw, the way the light had dimmed in her eyes, as if the island itself had started to drain her. Clara set the photograph down and stood, walking to the window. Outside, the marsh glistened under the soft morning sun, the tall grasses swaying gently in the breeze. The sky was clear, a brilliant shade of blue that stretched endlessly overhead. It was the kind of morning that used to fill her with excitement, the promise of a day spent exploring the island's hidden corners, searching for treasures washed up by the tide. She rested her hands on the windowsill, the wood cool beneath her fingers. Her gaze drifted toward the water, and her mind wandered back to a summer day long ago when she had first met Brian. She had been 12, wandering down the beach by herself, when she spotted him, tall and lanky, his hair wild from the wind, digging in the sand with a rusted old shovel. He had been looking for buried treasure, or at least that's what he'd said when she asked him. They had spent the rest of that summer together, two inseparable kids, sharing secrets and dreams beneath the wide, open sky. Brian had been a constant presence on the island during her teenage years, the one person she could always count on when things became too much at home. They would escape to the far side of the island, where the beach stretched for miles without another soul in sight, and talk about everything and nothing as the waves lapped at their feet. But then, like everything else, that too had changed. Clara had grown up, left for college, and Brian had remained behind, rooted to the island in a way she had never been. The last time she had seen him was years ago, before she fled to Chicago, before life in the city had swallowed her whole. Clara turned away from the window, her chest tightening at the thought of the island's ghosts, the memories that clung to every corner of this place. They were inescapable, no matter how far she had tried to run. She left the room, her footsteps soft as she descended the stairs. The house was still quiet, though she knew her mother was somewhere within its walls, moving through the day at her own slow pace. The kitchen was empty when Clara entered, the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. A half-filled mug sat on the counter, a reminder of Christine's early morning rituals, ones that had likely not changed in the years since Clara had been gone. She stepped out onto the porch, the breeze welcoming her with the familiar scent of the sea. The marsh lay before her, vast and untamed, just as it always had been. But today, it felt different. The weight of the past pressed heavier on her heart, the memories more vivid, more insistent. Clara knew that the island held more than just the ghosts of her family. It held a version of herself she wasn't sure she was ready to confront. Chapter 4. Fleeing the South. The sky was overcast, with thick clouds rolling in from the horizon, casting the island in a somber gray. Clara stood at the edge of the porch, her hands resting on the railing, staring out at the endless marsh. The wind had picked up, stirring the grasses and sending a ripple across the water's surface. The air felt heavy, as though the island itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Clara's thoughts were far from the marsh and the approaching storm. They lingered on the moment she had fled this place, all those years ago. She had left in a hurry, her bags hastily packed, the decision made in the middle of a fight with her mother that had erupted without warning but had been brewing for months. The memories of that day were tangled and blurred, but the emotions still burned as clearly as if they had happened yesterday. Her father had just passed, and the grief in the house had been suffocating. Christine had retreated inward, barely speaking, while Clara had thrown herself into anything that could distract her from the pain. She remembered standing in the kitchen, the sunlight streaming through the window, as her mother's voice cracked the silence, sharp and cold. Clara had snapped back, the tension finally boiling over into an argument that neither of them had expected but both had seen coming. That fight had been the last straw, the final push that sent Clara fleeing to the city, to Chicago, where she could disappear into the noise and anonymity. She had thought she was leaving behind the weight of the South, the slow, suffocating pace of life on the island, and the family she could no longer bear to face. But now, Standing here again, she realized that she had never truly left. The island had stayed with her, tucked away in the corners of her mind, waiting for her to return. The wind shifted, carrying with it the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. Clara turned her head slightly, her eyes tracing the familiar curve of the coastline. The beach was a short walk from the house, hidden just beyond the marsh. She used to go there almost every day, back when the world seemed simpler, back when her father was alive and the island was a place of adventure rather than a prison. Her feet carried her off the porch and down the path that wound through the tall grass. The sand was soft beneath her shoes as she reached the beach, the shoreline stretching before her like a memory made real. The ocean churned in the distance, its surface dark and restless, reflecting the storm brewing in the sky above. Clara's mind drifted back to those long summer days spent on this beach. She remembered running along the water's edge, her laughter mingling with the cry of the gulls overhead. She remembered her father standing knee-deep in the surf, teaching her how to cast a fishing line, his patience endless as she fumbled with the rod. And she remembered Brian, his face sun-kissed and smiling, as they splashed in the waves, daring each other to go farther out into the sea. The memories washed over her, one after another, as relentless as the tide. She had once loved this place, truly loved it, but that love had been lost somewhere along the way, buried beneath the weight of loss, grief, and the slow unraveling of her family. When her father died, something inside her had broken, and the island had become a place she couldn't bear to face any longer. Clara crouched down near the water, her fingers trailing through the wet sand. She dug her hand into the earth, feeling the cool grains slip through her fingers as the waves lapped gently at the shore. It was a simple act, but it felt like a connection to something deeper, something she had lost when she left. The wind picked up again, stronger this time, and Clara stood, brushing the sand from her hands. The storm was moving closer, the sky darkening with each passing minute. She could feel the electricity in the air, the tension building as the first drops of rain began to fall. Her gaze shifted back toward the house, its silhouette faint in the distance. She hadn't intended to stay long when she arrived, just a few days, maybe a week at most. But now, the idea of leaving again felt different. There was something unfinished here, something she hadn't realized she was still running from until now. As the rain began to fall in earnest, Clara turned and made her way back up the path, her mind heavy with the weight of everything that had brought her to this moment. The island had always been a place of refuge, but it had also been a place of exile. She had fled once, hoping to escape the past, but now she knew there was no outrunning it. The memories, the pain, the love, they were all woven into the fabric of this place, as much a part of it as the sand and the sea. When she reached the porch again, she paused, the rain drumming steadily on the roof. She could feel the tension in the air, not just from the storm, but from the island itself. It was as though the past and present were colliding, forcing her to confront everything she had tried so hard to forget. Clara stepped inside, the warmth of the house wrapping around her like a familiar embrace. She stood in the entryway, her wet shoes leaving faint prints on the worn floor. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the urge to run. Chapter 5. The Unspoken Goodbye. The rain pounded against the windows, a steady rhythm that echoed through the house, filling the silence with its relentless beat. The storm had fully arrived, dark clouds hanging low in the sky, blotting out any trace of sunlight. The wind howled outside, bending the trees and whipping the sea into a frenzy. It was the kind of storm that settled deep into the bones of the island, as much a part of its landscape as the marsh and the tide. Clara stood in the kitchen, her fingers tracing the rim of an empty coffee cup on the counter. She had spent the morning moving through the house, trying to find something, anything, to keep her mind occupied. but the tension that had been building since her arrival was impossible to shake. It was like the storm outside had somehow seeped into the walls, into her chest, stirring up emotions she wasn't ready to confront. Her mother's presence was a quiet one, barely noticeable, like the distant hum of an old appliance in the background. Christine had always been like that, even before the illness. A subtle force, never overtly controlling but always there, always watching. Clara hadn't seen her much that morning. She knew her mother preferred to stay in her room when the weather turned like this, likely resting or reading, or maybe just lying still, waiting for the storm to pass. The weight of the news Clara had learned the previous night still sat heavy on her shoulders, pulling her down. The word cancer had hung between them like a specter, unspoken but undeniable. She hadn't cried, not yet. There was a numbness that came with the knowledge, as if her mind hadn't fully processed what it meant. Terminal. That word, too, felt like a punch to the gut, hollowing her out with its finality. She moved to the window, pressing her hand against the cool glass as the rain streaked down in frantic, twisting paths. Beyond the marsh, the ocean was wild, its waves crashing violently against the shore. The sky was nearly black now, swirling with storm clouds, but every now and then, a flash of lightning illuminated the horizon, casting the scene in a stark, eerie light. The house groaned in response to the wind, the old beams creaking and shifting as if the storm were trying to pry them apart. Clara felt much the same, like the forces swirling around her were slowly unraveling her, pulling at the seams she had so carefully stitched together over the years. She couldn't stop thinking about the time that had slipped away. All those years in Chicago, the distance she had placed between herself and her mother, between herself and everything this island represented. And now, standing in this old house that had held her childhood, she felt the weight of all that time like a physical burden pressing down on her chest. She wandered through the house, the worn floorboards creaking under her steps as she moved from room to room, each one filled with memories she had tried to forget. The dining room, where they had once gathered for meals in awkward silence after her father's death. The living room, where her mother had sat for hours in the armchair by the window, staring out at the marsh as if searching for something she had lost. Clara had always wondered what it was her mother had seen out there, what had kept her sitting so still for so long. In the hallway, Clara stopped at a closed door. Her father's study. The door hadn't been opened in years. She had never asked, but she knew her mother had kept it closed after he was gone, preserving it like a shrine to the man he had been. Clara's hand hovered over the doorknob, hesitating for a moment before she finally turned it. The room smelled of dust and old paper. It was exactly as she remembered. His books still neatly stacked on the shelves, his fishing gear piled in the corner, and his desk, covered with notes and papers, left untouched since the last time he had sat there. Clara walked over to the desk, her fingers ghosting over the yellowed papers, feeling the weight of his absence like a physical force. Her gaze fell on a framed photo on the desk. It was the same photo that sat in her bedroom. Her and her father on the beach, their smiles wide and carefree. She picked it up, holding it in her hands as she sank into the chair behind the desk. The wood creaked beneath her, the seat still shaped to fit his form. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to summon the sound of his voice, the warmth of his presence, but it was slipping away, fading with time like the photo in her hands. Outside, the storm raged on, the wind rattling the windows and shaking the house to its core. Clara felt like a child again, alone in the midst of a world too big and too uncertain. The last time she had felt like this was the day her father had died. The day everything had changed. She had tried to run from it, to bury it under the noise and chaos of city life. But now, sitting in this room, in the storm's grip, she realized there was no running from it. Clara set the photo down and stood, feeling the weight of the room, the memories, the grief, all settling around her like the rain falling outside. She closed the door softly behind her as she left the study, sealing it off once again, as if closing it could keep the past contained. Back in her bedroom, the storm continued its relentless assault on the island. The wind howled, and the rain drummed against the roof, but inside, everything was still. Clara lay down on the bed, pulling the old quilt over herself, the one her grandmother had made years ago. It smelled faintly of lavender, of summer nights spent curled up in this very room, listening to the distant sound of the sea. The weight of the past, the island, her father's memory, and now her mother's illness. It all pressed down on her, but Clara didn't fight it anymore. She let it settle over her, the unspoken goodbye that had begun the moment she learned the truth. As the storm raged outside, Clara closed her eyes and let the house, the island, the memories, and the rain carry her into the quiet void of sleep. Chapter 6. Tides of Change. The rain had finally stopped by the time Clara woke the next morning, leaving behind a world washed clean and shimmering under the pale light of dawn. The storm had passed, but the island still bore the marks of its fury. Branches lay scattered across the ground, the trees dripping with water, their leaves heavy and bowed. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and salt, the sea still restless in the distance, its waves crashing against the shore in a steady rhythm. Clara stood at the window, watching as the sky slowly lightened, the clouds breaking apart to reveal slivers of blue. The storm had left everything feeling fragile, as if the island was still holding its breath, unsure of what would come next. It mirrored the way Clara felt inside, unsteady, waiting for something to shift. She had slept fitfully, her dreams filled with fragments of the past and flashes of her mother's face, pale and drawn, the weight of her illness casting a shadow over everything. When she had finally woken, it was with the familiar heaviness in her chest, the knowledge that nothing could be the same now. She couldn't run from this anymore. Leaving her room, Clara made her way downstairs, her bare feet silent against the old wood floors. The house was still, the quiet almost unnatural after the noise of the storm. She paused in the hallway, glancing toward her mother's bedroom door, but it remained closed, the room behind it hidden away like so much else in this house. Clara stepped outside, the cool morning air hitting her face like a wake-up call. The ground was wet beneath her feet, the grass slick and shining with dew. The marsh stretched out before her, serene in the soft light, as if the storm had never touched it. The sky above was clear now, an endless expanse of pale blue, fragile and beautiful in its simplicity. She walked slowly toward the beach, the path familiar beneath her feet, the sounds of the island waking up around her. Birds called out in the distance, their cries sharp against the quiet, while the breeze stirred the reeds and rustled the leaves. Everything felt peaceful, but there was a tension lingering just beneath the surface, a reminder of all that had changed and all that was yet to come. When Clara reached the beach, she stopped, taking in the scene before her. The ocean was calmer now, the waves gentler as they rolled onto the shore, leaving behind a trail of foam on the sand. The sky above was streaked with the soft hues of dawn, pinks and golds bleeding into the pale blue, the colors reflected in the water below. It was beautiful, in the way only something wild and untamed could be. She stood there for a long time, letting the sea breeze wash over her, the sound of the waves filling her ears. The beach was littered with debris from the storm, driftwood, seaweed, shells scattered like forgotten treasures. But there was something else too, something that made Clara's heart tighten in her chest. The beach was dotted with small shapes, some moving slowly, others still and lifeless. Turtles, dozens of them, scattered along the shoreline, some stranded by the storm, others making their slow journey back to the sea. Clara felt a pang of sadness as she knelt down beside one of the still figures, its small body motionless on the sand. She reached out, her fingers brushing lightly over its rough shell, feeling the cool, damp surface beneath her touch. The storm had been cruel to them, as it had been to everything on the island. Clara looked out at the ocean, watching as a few turtles made their way toward the water, their movements slow but determined. It was as if they were reclaiming what had been taken from them, finding their way back despite the odds. She stood and began walking along the beach, her eyes scanning the sand for more turtles in need of help. Her feet left deep prints in the wet sand as she moved, the tide creeping closer with each passing moment. As she worked, time seemed to blur, the rhythm of her movements mirroring the ebb and flow of the waves. She spotted another turtle, this one struggling to flip itself over. Clara hurried to its side, gently turning it upright, her hands steady as she guided it toward the water. The turtle's small, webbed feet paddled awkwardly in the sand, but it moved forward, inch by inch, until the water finally met its body. A wave rolled in, and the turtle disappeared into the surf, carried away by the tide. Clara watched it go, a strange sense of calm settling over her. There was something comforting about the way the turtles kept going, despite the storm, despite the odds. They didn't stop, didn't give up. They just kept moving, kept trying to reach the sea. There was a lesson in that, one she hadn't expected to find on this quiet morning. The sun was higher in the sky now, its warmth chasing away the lingering chill of the storm. Clara wiped the sweat from her brow and continued down the beach, finding more turtles, helping where she could. The beach was alive with movement, with life returning to its natural rhythm. As she worked, her thoughts drifted back to her mother, to the illness that was slowly taking her away. Clara had always been so angry, so resentful of the distance between them. But now, standing here on this beach, she realized that it didn't matter anymore. There wasn't time for anger, for regret. The only thing that mattered was the time they had left. The last turtle slipped into the water, and Clara stood there for a moment longer, watching as the waves carried it out to sea. The tide was coming in now, the ocean reclaiming the beach, washing away the marks left by the storm. But the memory of it would remain, just as the memories of this summer, of this place, would stay with her long after she left. Clara turned back toward the house, her steps slow and deliberate, the weight of the past still heavy on her shoulders, but lighter now, somehow. The storm had passed, but the change it had brought was just beginning to settle. The island had always been a place of endings and beginnings, of loss and renewal, and Clara was starting to understand that her time here would be no different. As she walked, the sun rose higher in the sky, its light bright and golden, casting long shadows across the sand. The island, too, seemed to breathe easier in the aftermath of the storm, its beauty revealed in the wake of destruction. And for the first time in a long while, Clara felt a sense of peace, a fragile, fleeting peace, but peace nonetheless. The tide had turned, and so had she. Chapter 7. The Weight of Truth. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long, golden rays across the marsh as Clara made her way back to the house. Her clothes clung to her skin, damp with sweat and the lingering humidity of the storm, but her mind was elsewhere, drifting through the weight of everything she had been holding back. The air felt thick around her, as if the island itself had absorbed the grief she had kept buried since arriving. As she approached the house, the familiar creaks of the old porch greeted her, the wood groaning underfoot as she stepped onto it. Clara paused, her eyes drawn to the horizon where the marsh met the sky, the fading light painting everything in soft hues of pink and orange. It was beautiful, almost serene, too peaceful for the thoughts that churned inside her. Inside, the house felt too quiet, the kind of silence that gnawed at the edges of her thoughts, refusing to be ignored. Christine's door remained closed, a reminder of the conversation that still hadn't happened. Clara knew it was time. Time to face the truth that had been lurking just beneath the surface since she had arrived. Time to confront the unspoken reality that her mother's illness was more than just a passing shadow. She climbed the stairs slowly, the sound of her feet echoing in the empty hallway. As she reached her mother's door, she hesitated, her hand resting on the smooth wood, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. For a moment, she wanted to turn back, to retreat to the safety of her own room, to pretend that nothing had changed. But the time for pretending had passed, swept away with the storm. Clara opened the door quietly, the hinges creaking softly as the room came into view. Her mother lay in bed, her frail body nestled under the thin sheets, her face pale and almost translucent in the fading light. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old books, a scent that had always been comforting, but now felt bittersweet. Christine's eyes were closed, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. She looked so small, so fragile, as if the illness had slowly stolen the vitality that once filled her frame. Clara stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her mother sleep, her heart heavy with 1,000 unsaid words. She stepped further into the room, her movements careful and deliberate. The bedside table was cluttered with small reminders of the illness, bottles of medication, tissues, a glass of water that had gone untouched. A book lay open on her mother's lap, its pages yellowed with age, the spine cracked from years of use. Clara recognized it immediately, a favorite from her childhood, one her mother had read to her so many times that she could still recall the sound of her voice reciting the words. Clara sat down gently on the edge of the bed, her weight barely disturbing the mattress. She glanced at her mother's face again, noticing the fine lines that traced her features, the tiredness that lingered in the set of her mouth. There was a time when Christine had seemed invincible, a pillar of strength that held their family together through the roughest moments. But that time had passed, and now the cracks were visible, the toll of the illness undeniable. She reached out, her hand hovering over her mother's for a moment before finally resting it on top, feeling the coolness of her skin. The connection was small, but it was enough. Clara's chest tightened, a familiar ache spreading through her as she sat there, the silence between them filled with the weight of all the things they had never said. Memories rushed back, of summers spent on the beach, of long days when the island felt like the center of their world. She remembered the way her mother used to laugh, the sound bright and full of life, and how that laughter had faded over the years, replaced by silence and distance. She remembered the way they used to be, before everything fell apart, before her father's death cast a shadow over their family, and before Clara ran away, chasing an escape that had never really been there. As the light outside began to fade, Clara remained at her mother's side, her hands still resting on hers. The air felt thick with unspoken truths, with the knowledge that time was slipping away, that this moment, fragile and fleeting, was one of the last they would share. Christine stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open for a brief moment, catching the last rays of sunlight as they filtered through the window. Clara watched as her mother's gaze drifted across the room, landing on the small objects that filled the space before finally resting on her. Their eyes met, and in that brief, silent exchange, Clara felt the full weight of her mother's illness, its inevitability, its finality, settle over her. She squeezed her mother's hand gently, her heart pounding in her chest. The words she had been holding back, the apologies, the regrets, the love, pressed against the back of her throat, but she swallowed them down. There was no need for words now. They both knew what was coming. The room grew darker, the last remnants of daylight slipping away, leaving only the soft glow of the bedside lamp casting a faint light over them. The storm may have passed, but the real battle had just begun. Clara sat with her mother until the darkness fully settled, the weight of the unspoken filling the space between them. And though nothing had been said, everything had been understood. The night crept in slowly, and with it, the unrelenting truth that time was slipping through their fingers, as elusive and unstoppable as the tide. Chapter 8. Beneath the Surface. The air was thick with the smell of salt and marsh as Clara moved through the early morning fog, her steps quiet on the wooden dock that stretched out over the water. The world around her was still, the only sound the soft lapping of the tide against the posts. The fog hung low, casting a veil over the landscape, making the familiar stretch of the island feel foreign and distant, as if she were walking through a dream. Clara had woken before dawn, unable to stay in the house any longer, the weight of her mother's illness pressing too heavily on her chest. She needed to breathe, to feel the open air and remind herself that there was more beyond the small, suffocating space of the house. Her mother was still sleeping when she left, her frail form barely noticeable beneath the covers. It was a sleep that seemed to grow deeper with each passing day, as if Christine was slowly retreating from the world, preparing for the inevitable. The dock creaked under Clara's weight as she reached the end, the wooden planks worn smooth from years of weather and use. She stood there, staring out at the water, where the surface was flat and still, a mirror reflecting the pale light of dawn. The marshes beyond were barely visible through the fog, their outlines blurred, merging with the sky in a seamless gray. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, shivering slightly as the morning breeze brushed against her skin. The fog seemed to muffle everything, dulling the edges of the world, making it feel distant and unreal. The isolation of the island, the weight of the past, and the looming presence of her mother's illness all pressed in on her, as heavy and inescapable as the fog itself. She knelt down, letting her fingers trail through the water, watching the ripples spread out in gentle circles. The water was cool, almost cold, and it shocked her system. A brief reminder that she was still here, still in this moment, even as everything else felt like it was slipping away. She wanted to hold on to something, but there was nothing solid enough, nothing to anchor her against the tide that was pulling her away from the life she had known. Her thoughts drifted to the past, to the summers she had spent on this dock with her father. She could almost see him standing at the end, casting his fishing line into the water, his face calm and content in a way it never seemed to be anywhere else. The island had always been his escape, the place where he could breathe, where the weight of responsibility seemed to lift, if only for a little while. And it had been her escape too, once. But after his death, the island had become a place of ghosts, memories too painful to face, a reminder of everything that had been lost. Clara had run from it all, hoping that the distance would somehow ease the ache in her chest. But now, standing here again, she realized that the island had never let her go. It had been waiting, patient and unyielding, for her to return and confront the past she had tried so hard to forget. The water lapped softly against the dock, the sound rhythmic and soothing, like the heartbeat of the island itself. Clara closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her, trying to find some sense of peace in it. But her mind kept circling back to her mother, to the time that was slipping away too quickly, too quietly. The thought of losing her, of being alone, was too much to bear. Yet, there was no escaping it. The truth was as inevitable as the tide, and no amount of distance or denial could change that. Clara opened her eyes, her gaze drawn to the horizon where the fog was beginning to lift, revealing the faint outline of the marshes and the distant rise of the dunes. The world was slowly coming back into focus, but it didn't bring the clarity she had hoped for. Instead, It only made the weight of reality settle more firmly around her shoulders. She stood, her hands resting on the railing of the dock, her fingers gripping the worn wood as if it could somehow keep her grounded. The wind picked up, rustling the reeds in the distance, carrying with it the scent of the sea. For a moment, she felt like she was teetering on the edge of something, on the verge of understanding something she had been avoiding for too long. The island was both a place of refuge and a prison, holding her captive in a past she couldn't fully escape. But it was also a place of healing, a place where she could confront the truths she had buried deep inside herself. She had spent so long running, so long avoiding the pain, the grief, the love that had never been fully expressed. But now, here in the quiet of the morning, with the fog lifting and the sea stretching out before her, she knew she couldn't run anymore. Clara's gaze shifted to the horizon, where the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale, golden light over the water. The fog was burning away, the world becoming clearer with each passing moment. It was as if the island itself was urging her to see things as they truly were, to face the inevitable, to accept the truth that she had been avoiding for so long. She let out a long breath, her shoulders sagging under the weight of it all. There was no easy answer, no quick fix for the pain that was coming. But standing here, with the sea stretching out before her and the island waking up around her, she felt a glimmer of understanding. The island had always been a place of beginnings and endings, of life and loss, of storms and calm. And maybe that was the only truth she needed right now. Clara turned away from the water, her footsteps slow and deliberate as she made her way back toward the house. The fog had almost completely lifted now, the sky clear and bright, the morning filled with the sound of birds waking, the wind stirring the reeds, and the distant hum of the ocean. The island was alive again, and so was she, even in the face of everything she couldn't control. As she reached the porch, she paused for a moment, her hand resting on the railing. The house loomed before her, filled with memories and shadows, with the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. But it was also filled with love, deep, unspoken, enduring love, and that, she realized, was enough. She stepped inside, ready to face whatever the day would bring. Chapter 9. Storm's Edge. The sky had turned dark, a blanket of thick clouds stretching across the horizon, casting an ominous shadow over the island. Clara could feel the shift in the air, the way it had thickened with humidity and tension, the kind that always signaled an impending storm. The once calm, idyllic morning had given way to an uneasy stillness, a quiet that seemed to echo the heaviness inside her. Christine was asleep again, her breathing shallow and uneven. Clara had stayed by her mother's side for most of the day, watching the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of her chest, feeling the passage of time in each strained breath. She had tried to lose herself in the rhythm of caring for her, changing linens, tidying the bedside table, adjusting the pillows. But there was no escaping the underlying truth that was becoming harder to ignore. Her mother was fading. The storm was just beginning to roll in when Clara stepped outside, the wind starting to pick up, carrying the scent of rain and sea salt. The palm trees rustled, their long fronds bending under the force of the wind, and the marsh grasses swayed in unison, creating a soft, whispering sound that filled the air. Above, the clouds churned, shifting and swirling in a pattern that seemed both beautiful and terrifying, the prelude to something powerful. Clara made her way down to the beach, her feet sinking into the sand as the first droplets of rain began to fall. The sea was restless, the waves crashing against the shore with increasing force, their once gentle rhythm turning violent, as if the ocean itself was agitated, mirroring the storm building in the sky. The wind tugged at her hair, whipping it around her face, the sharp sting of rain cutting across her skin. She didn't mind the storm. It felt right, a reflection of the tempest swirling inside her. As she walked along the shoreline, her thoughts drifted to her mother again, to the long summer days they used to spend on this very beach. Christine had always loved the ocean, the way the waves seemed to cleanse everything, washing away the worries of the day. Clara remembered her mother's laugh, loud and full of life, as she chased after her in the surf, the two of them splashing through the water, the sun warm on their skin. Those memories felt distant now, like faded photographs stored away in a forgotten drawer, the edges worn and blurred. The storm intensified, the sky darkening further as thunder rumbled in the distance, a low growl that sent vibrations through the air. Clara stopped, her gaze fixed on the horizon, where the clouds met the sea in a seamless line of gray. It was the kind of storm that would come quickly and violently, the kind that would leave the world changed when it passed. And yet, there was something cleansing about it, something that felt almost like renewal. As she stood there, the wind pushing against her, the rain coming down harder, Clara spotted something further down the beach, a small, dark mass struggling against the tide. She squinted through the downpour, her heart skipping a beat when she realized what it was. A turtle, flipped onto its back, its legs flailing helplessly in the sand as the waves threatened to pull it back into the ocean. Without thinking, Clara ran toward it, her feet sinking into the wet sand as the rain lashed against her. The turtle was large, its shell weathered and scarred, a creature that had undoubtedly faced many storms before. But this one seemed too much for it, the struggle too great. Clara knelt beside it, her fingers digging into the wet sand as she carefully turned it over, her heart racing as the waves crashed closer. The turtle lay there for a moment, as if gathering its strength, its dark eyes blinking slowly. Clara watched it, her breath caught in her throat, willing it to move, to fight. And then, slowly, it began to drag itself forward, its movements slow but determined, pulling itself inch by inch toward the safety of the dunes. Clara followed, her hand hovering just above its shell, ready to help again if it faltered. Together, they moved up the beach, away from the encroaching tide, the storm raging around them. The rain poured down in sheets now, drenching them both, but Clara barely noticed. She was focused entirely on the turtle, on its sheer will to survive, to keep moving forward despite the odds stacked against it. There was something profoundly hopeful in that, something that resonated deep within her. When the turtle finally reached the safety of the dunes, Clara stopped, watching as it slowly made its way toward the tall grasses, disappearing into the shelter of the marsh. She stood there for a long time, the rain soaking through her clothes, her hair plastered to her face, her chest rising and falling with deep, steady breaths. The storm was in full force now, the wind howling through the dunes, the waves crashing louder than ever. But Clara felt strangely calm, as if the storm inside her had found its own rhythm. She turned back toward the house, the storm pushing against her as she walked, but she felt lighter somehow, as if the weight of the past few days had lifted, even if only slightly. The rain washed over her, cleansing her in a way that the ocean never could, and for the first time in what felt like a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. The house loomed ahead, its windows glowing faintly through the downpour, a beacon in the storm. Clara quickened her pace, her feet splashing through puddles as she neared the porch. She stopped at the bottom of the steps, turning once more to look at the ocean, where the storm raged on, relentless and wild. And yet, beneath the chaos, there was a kind of peace, a reminder that storms, no matter how violent, always passed, leaving something new in their wake. Clara climbed the steps, her body soaked and her limbs heavy, but her heart lighter than it had been in days. She stepped inside, the warmth of the house enveloping her as the door clicked shut behind her. The storm's roar muffled but still present, a distant reminder of the forces beyond her control. The storm would pass, as all storms did, and when it did, the world would be different. But for now, Clara allowed herself a moment of quiet, a moment of stillness in the midst of the tempest, knowing that no matter what came next, she would face it, just as she always had and always would. Chapter 10. After the Storm. The morning after the storm brought a hushed stillness, as if the world were holding its breath in the aftermath of the chaos. Clara stepped outside, the sun breaking through the remnants of gray clouds, casting a warm, golden light over the landscape. The air was crisp and clean, the lingering scent of rain mingling with the salt from the sea, creating a fragrant balm that washed away the remnants of last night's turmoil. The beach looked transformed, the violent waves having reshaped the shoreline, uncovering shells and driftwood that had been buried beneath the sand. Clara walked slowly, her bare feet sinking into the damp earth, feeling the cool grains between her toes. The world was fresh and alive, the vegetation glistening with moisture, every leaf vibrant against the blue sky. As she made her way down the beach, Clara noticed the tracks left behind by the storm, the impressions of the tide carving new patterns in the sand. It was a reminder of the fleeting nature of everything, how quickly life could change. The turtle she had helped yesterday swam in her mind, a symbol of resilience, its struggle a reflection of her own. Clara felt a swell of determination rise within her. She, too, would continue to fight. She knelt at the edge of the water, letting the waves lap at her hands, cool and refreshing against her skin. The sea sparkled in the sunlight, its vastness a comforting presence, each wave crashing ashore a reminder of the power of nature and the endurance of life. Clara watched as the water receded, and in that moment, she felt a connection to everything around her. The sky, the sea, the land, each part of a larger whole, intertwined and interdependent. Her gaze was drawn to the horizon, where the sun climbed higher, illuminating the distant marshes and the trees that dotted the landscape. The world felt both expansive and intimate, a tapestry of colors and textures woven together by the hand of time. Clara took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the salty air, grounding herself in this moment of clarity. As she stood, Clara's eyes caught sight of something further down the beach. A group of turtles was making its way toward the water, small and determined, their tiny bodies moving with purpose. Clara's heart quickened at the sight, a flicker of excitement igniting within her. She moved closer, drawn to their struggle against the sand. The baby turtles floundered slightly, the sand still damp and heavy from the storm. Clara knelt again, watching as they instinctively flapped their flippers, pushing themselves forward, each little effort a testament to their will to survive. It was a fragile moment, a reminder of the delicate balance of life, and Clara felt a deep sense of connection to these creatures as she observed their journey. She could see the ocean ahead, the waves beckoning them home. With each passing second, the distance between the turtles and the water shrank, and Clara felt a surge of hope. It was a race against the elements, a reminder that despite the obstacles in their path, they were determined to reach their destination. As the first turtle touched the water, a sense of triumph washed over Clara. She watched as the little creature instinctively swam, diving into the surf, and the others followed suit, one after another, until they were all safely in the ocean. Clara's heart soared with joy, her spirit lifted by their determination and strength. After they had disappeared into the waves, she remained at the water's edge, contemplating the beauty of the moment. Life was fragile, yet resilient. Storms would come and go, but beneath it all, there was a profound strength in survival. The sun rose higher, its warmth wrapping around Clara like a soft embrace, infusing her with a renewed sense of purpose. She stood, brushing the sand from her knees, and began to walk back toward the house. Her thoughts turned to her mother, to the conversations they still needed to have, and the time that was slipping away between them. Returning home, Clara took a moment to gather her thoughts. She walked through the front door, the familiar scent of her mother's lavender filling the air. The house felt warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the tempest outside just hours before. She moved quietly through the rooms, her heart heavy with anticipation and the weight of what lay ahead. As she approached Christine's room, Clara paused outside the door. She could hear her mother's breathing, soft and rhythmic, a sound that had become both a comfort and a source of pain. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open gently, the hinges creaking softly. Christine lay in bed, the morning light filtering through the window and casting a soft glow around her. Clara's heart ached at the sight. Her mother looked so fragile, so small against the expanse of the sheets. Clara stepped closer, taking a seat in the chair beside the bed, watching as her mother's chest rose and fell, the rhythm of her breath steady yet shallow. In that moment, Clara felt a surge of love and sorrow intertwine within her. She reached out, placing her hand over Christine's, feeling the coolness of her skin beneath her fingers. There was so much to say, so much left unsaid, and the urgency of it weighed heavily on Clara's heart. As she sat there, the sounds of the world outside began to fade, leaving only the steady pulse of her mother's heartbeat and the soft whisper of the breeze filtering through the window. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the emotions wash over her, allowing herself to feel the depth of everything she had experienced. The joy of the turtle's journey, the pain of her mother's illness, the realization of how precious and fleeting life truly was. Opening her eyes, Clara leaned closer, her gaze fixed on Christine's face. She could see the slight rise of her mother's lips, the hint of a smile resting there, as if Christine were sharing in the unspoken connection between them. In that moment, Clara knew they had time, however little it might be, to say what needed to be said, to express the love that had always been there, even through the silence. The storm outside had passed, leaving in its wake a world reborn, full of possibilities and challenges. And within the walls of the house, Clara felt the first flickers of hope igniting within her heart, ready to face whatever came next with the strength she had found in herself and the love that connected them both. Chapter 11. Fragments of Time. The days that followed the storm unfurled like the petals of a blooming flower, each moment vibrant and rich with unspoken emotions. Clara found herself settling into a rhythm, a dance of care and reflection as she navigated the delicate space between daughter and caregiver. The sun cast a warm glow over the island, the vibrant colors of the landscape contrasting sharply with the shadows that loomed over their shared reality. Each morning, Clara awoke to the soft sound of the waves lapping against the shore, a gentle reminder of the ocean's presence. She would slip out of bed, careful not to disturb Christine, and step outside to greet the dawn. The air was fresh and invigorating, filled with the scent of salt and blooming jasmine, a calming balm that eased her racing thoughts. Clara began to walk along the beach each morning, letting the rhythmic sound of the ocean ground her. She collected shells and bits of driftwood, each piece a token of the world around her, reminders of the beauty that still existed despite the heaviness in her heart. The sand felt cool beneath her feet, and she relished the momentary solitude, the freedom of being lost in the vastness of the shore. As the sun rose higher, she would return to the house, her arms full of treasures. Christine would be awake by then, her face brightening at the sight of her daughter's offerings. Clara would set the shells on the table, arranging them into a makeshift centerpiece, a collection of colors and textures that spoke of life and resilience. But amid these small joys, there were moments of deep reflection, a poignant acknowledgement of their shared sorrow. Clara would often find herself gazing out the window, lost in thought as the world outside continued its dance. She would watch the fishermen casting their lines into the water, their boats bobbing gently with the tide, the distant call of seagulls weaving through the air. The beauty of it all felt bittersweet, a reminder of what was fleeting. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Clara found herself on the porch with Christine, the two of them sitting together in a comfortable silence. Clara watched as her mother's fingers traced the lines of a quilt, the fabric worn and frayed, a patchwork of memories stitched together over the years. Clara could see the love in each careful stitch, the stories woven into the fabric. In that quiet moment, she noticed the way Christine's gaze softened as she looked out at the horizon, her expression contemplative and serene. Clara felt a pang in her chest, an understanding of the weight her mother carried, the burden of time slipping away. Yet there was also a flicker of strength in Christine's eyes, a testament to the resilience that had defined her life. Clara took in the details of her mother's face, the lines that told stories of laughter and tears, the gentle curve of her smile, and the way her hair framed her face like a halo. It struck Clara how beautiful Christine was, not just in the physical sense, but in the depth of her spirit. The love between them was palpable, filling the space with a warmth that could not be diminished by circumstance. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the porch, Clara felt an urgency to capture the moments they had left. She retrieved her camera from the house and began to take pictures, not just of the landscape, but of her mother. Each click of the shutter froze time, capturing the fleeting beauty of the present, a tangible reminder of their shared journey. Christine laughed softly as Clara directed her, her eyes sparkling with life despite the fatigue that lined her features. Clara focused on the little things, the way the light caught in her mother's hair, the joy in her smile, the grace of her hands as they gestured in the air. Each image became a treasure, a piece of their story, a fragment of time preserved in the frame. As they continued to create memories, Clara felt a shift within herself. The weight of grief began to lighten, replaced by a sense of gratitude for the time they had together. She could see the beauty in the ordinary moments, the quiet exchanges that spoke volumes without words. Each picture was a testament to their bond, a reflection of the love that transcended the circumstances surrounding them. With each passing day, Clara grew more aware of the importance of these fleeting moments. She realized that even as the shadows deepened, there was light to be found in their connection. It became a shared understanding, a silent agreement to cherish the time they had, to fill their days with laughter and love, and to honor the memories they were creating. That evening, as the sky transformed into a canvas of oranges and pinks, Clara and Christine sat together on the porch, the weight of the world lifted for just a moment. Clara leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, feeling the warmth radiate from her. In that simple gesture, Clara found solace, a reminder that love was the most powerful force of all. As darkness fell and the first stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Clara felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, bound by a love that could not be broken. And as the world continued to turn, Clara felt a renewed sense of hope flickering within her, igniting a fire that would guide her through the days to come. Chapter 12: Homecoming. The days blended into each other, a seamless tapestry of light and shadow, laughter and tears. Clara found herself increasingly drawn into the rhythm of the island, the ebb and flow of life that surrounded her. The once familiar landscape transformed into a sanctuary, a place where she could breathe, reflect, and cherish each moment with her mother. As the summer sun climbed higher, Clara's visits to the beach became a daily ritual. She embraced the warmth of the sun on her skin, the soft breeze that rustled through the palms, and the salty tang of the ocean air. Each visit became a pilgrimage, a journey of healing and rediscovery as she explored the shoreline and collected shells that sparkled like jewels in the morning light. One particularly vibrant afternoon, Clara set out to find a new spot along the coast, a hidden cove she had stumbled upon during one of her solitary walks. The path was winding and overgrown, the tall grasses swaying gently as she navigated through the foliage. Each step felt like a step back in time, a journey to a place where the worries of the world faded away, replaced by the simple beauty of nature. As she approached the cove, the sound of waves crashing against the rocks greeted her, a melodic rhythm that harmonized with her heartbeat. The cove opened up before her, a hidden gem sheltered from the world. The water sparkled in the sunlight, a brilliant shade of turquoise that called to her. Clara felt a surge of joy at the sight, a sense of belonging that wrapped around her like a warm embrace. She settled onto a large rock, the sun warming her skin, and allowed herself to soak in the beauty of her surroundings. The ocean stretched out endlessly before her, a vast expanse that seemed to mirror her thoughts, the depths of her emotions swirling like the waves. She closed her eyes, listening to the soothing sound of the water and letting the sun envelop her in its warmth. After a while, she noticed something moving in the distance, a figure approaching the shoreline. Clara squinted against the brightness, her heart skipping a beat as she recognized the familiar silhouette. It was Brian, her childhood sweetheart, walking along the beach with an easy gait, the wind tousling his hair. Memories rushed back, unearthing a mixture of nostalgia and longing that had lain dormant within her. Brian was a presence she had never quite forgotten, a piece of her past that lingered in her mind like a half-remembered dream. The last time she had seen him was years ago, just before she left the island to chase her ambitions in Chicago. As he drew closer, Clara felt a flutter of uncertainty in her stomach, a cocktail of emotions that both excited and terrified her. He spotted her, and a smile broke across his face, lighting up his features and transforming him from a mere silhouette into the boy she had once loved. Clara's heart raced, the memories flooding back like the tide, reminding her of their shared laughter, the innocent adventures they had embarked on, and the bittersweet nature of their parting. As he approached, Clara noticed the way the sun caught the highlights in his hair, the way his eyes sparkled with warmth and familiarity. They had both grown, but there was something timeless about him, a connection that transcended the years and distance. The air between them crackled with unspoken words, emotions that hung in the space like a delicate thread. Brian stopped a few paces away, taking a moment to absorb the sight of her. Clara could see the surprise and delight etched on his face, mirrored in her own expression. They stood there, suspended in time, the world around them fading into the background as the memories swirled around them like the sea foam at their feet. As he stepped closer, Clara felt her heart swell with emotions she had long buried. She was no longer the girl who had fled the island, carrying her dreams and a heavy heart. She was a woman shaped by experience, strengthened by love and loss. The past lingered like a fragrance, bittersweet yet comforting, and now stood before her, embodied in the person of Brian. Clara's thoughts drifted to her mother, to the fragile threads that connected their lives, and she realized that this moment felt like a homecoming, a return to a place where everything began. Brian's presence rekindled a warmth within her, a sense of belonging that she had thought lost to time. They spent the afternoon walking along the shoreline, the sun dipping lower in the sky, casting a golden hue over the water. Clara found herself sharing bits of her life, her struggles, her journey, and the challenges she had faced, while Brian opened up about his own experiences, revealing a depth that had matured with time. Though their conversations were silent, Clara could feel the understanding between them deepen with every shared glance, every fleeting touch. Each moment was a piece of the puzzle that had once bound them together, reawakening of a bond that had never truly faded. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Clara felt a flicker of hope igniting within her, a spark that whispered of new beginnings. They returned to the cove, the waves gently crashing against the shore, and settled onto the sand. The air was filled with the sounds of nature, crickets chirping, the rustle of palm fronds swaying in the evening breeze. The beauty of the moment wrapped around them, a cocoon of warmth and connection. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, Clara felt a sense of peace enveloping her. In that moment, she understood that life was a series of cycles, a continuous ebb and flow. The storm had passed, revealing new paths and unexpected reunions. With Brian by her side, she felt a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder that love had the power to heal and bind even the most fractured of souls. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night unfold, and Clara couldn't help but feel that she was exactly where she was meant to be, back on the island, connected to her roots, and sharing this moment with someone who had once meant everything to her. She could almost feel her mother's presence, a silent blessing woven into the fabric of their reunion. In the depths of her heart, Clara knew that the journey was far from over, but with each passing day, she was learning to embrace the complexities of love and loss, to cherish the moments of joy amidst the shadows. And as the stars continued to twinkle above, she felt a flicker of hope ignite within her, an assurance that whatever lay ahead, she would face it with courage and an open heart. Chapter 13. The Weight of Secrets. The days grew warmer as summer settled into its stride, filling Clara's world with golden light and vibrant hues. Each morning began with the soft glow of dawn breaking over the horizon, a gentle nudge that beckoned her to rise and embrace the day. Yet beneath the sun's radiance, a lingering tension rested in her heart, a secret that weighed heavily on her soul. Clara's moments with Brian had reignited memories and emotions she thought she had left behind. Their silent companionship filled her with a warmth she hadn't anticipated, but it also resurfaced the unresolved feelings of her past, the unresolved relationship with her mother and the ache of her father's absence. The island had become a sanctuary, yet it was also a reminder of the wounds that needed healing. Every afternoon, Clara joined Christine for tea on the porch, the familiar ritual offering a sense of comfort amidst the growing tension. Clara would pour the tea, the steam curling into the air like wisps of unspoken thoughts. Christine would watch the horizon, her gaze distant yet contemplative, as if searching for something beyond the waves. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away, that every moment they spent together held a weight of unexpressed emotions. She could see the toll that illness had taken on her mother. There were days when Christine's laughter seemed to ring hollow, and her smile appeared forced, as if she were masking the pain beneath. The reality of their situation loomed over Clara, a shadow that grew longer with each passing day. One evening, Clara found herself drawn to the beach, the salt air mingling with the scent of jasmine as she walked along the shore, lost in thought. The horizon glowed with the remnants of the sunset, the sky ablaze with shades of orange and purple. She paused, letting the waves kiss her feet, grounding herself in the present as she watched the sun dip below the water. It was then that she spotted something glimmering in the sand, partially buried beneath a thin layer of seaweed. Curiosity piqued, Clara knelt down to investigate, her fingers brushing against the cool surface. She uncovered a small, ornate locket, the metal tarnished but beautiful, a delicate piece that seemed to whisper stories of the past. Opening the locket, Clara revealed two small photographs, one of a young woman with striking features and a gentle smile, the other of a handsome man, his expression confident yet tender. A jolt of recognition shot through her. The woman was unmistakably her mother, and the man bore a striking resemblance to Clara's father. The discovery felt monumental, a glimpse into a time she had never known. Clara held the locket tightly, a flood of emotions washing over her. Questions swirled in her mind. Who had this belonged to? Why had it been lost here? And most importantly, what secrets lay hidden behind those smiles? She felt a deep yearning to understand her mother's past, to uncover the pieces of her father's life that had shaped the family's history. As she turned the locket over in her hands, Clara realized that it symbolized the fragility of their lives, the stories, the memories, and the secrets that bound them together. The weight of her mother's illness felt heavier now, the urgency to bridge the gap between them pressing on her heart. That night, as Clara lay in bed, the locket rested on her nightstand, gleaming in the soft moonlight. Sleep eluded her as she grappled with the feelings it had stirred within her. She could sense the distance that had grown between her and Christine, the unspoken words hanging like a heavy curtain in the air. Clara's heart ached with the desire to connect, to understand the woman who had given her life and yet remained a stranger in many ways. The following day, Clara woke with a renewed determination. She decided to share her discovery with Christine, to delve into the past and uncover the stories that had shaped their family. As she made her way to the porch, the locket felt like a key, an invitation to unlock the door to understanding and intimacy. Christine sat in her favorite chair, gazing out at the ocean as she often did. Clara approached her, heart pounding with anticipation and trepidation. She sat down across from her mother, the locket resting in her palm, a tangible connection to the past. But as Clara prepared to speak, she hesitated. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, and she felt the fear of rejection creeping in. What if Christine wasn't ready to share? What if the memories were too painful? Clara's heart raced as she considered the fragile nature of their relationship. In that silence, the world around them continued its rhythm. Waves crashing, birds calling, the sun glinting off the water. Clara looked at Christine, whose face remained serene yet distant. The longing for connection swelled within her, but the fear of opening old wounds held her back. Instead of voicing her thoughts, Clara stood and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the vast ocean. She took a deep breath, feeling the salty breeze against her skin, hoping it would carry her unspoken words into the air. She needed to be patient, to trust that the moment would come when they could confront the shadows of the past together. As she stood there, the locket clutched tightly in her hand, Clara felt the tide of emotion surge within her. She knew that the time would come for revelations, for understanding the weight of secrets that had lingered between them for far too long. And when that moment arrived, she would be ready to embrace it with an open heart, guided by the love that had brought them this far. Chapter 14. The Calm Before the Storm. As summer deepened, the island pulsed with life, its vibrant colors and sounds weaving a rich tapestry around Clara and Christine. The days became a series of moments filled with laughter and warmth, but beneath the surface, Clara sensed a storm brewing, not one of nature, but of emotions long buried in truths yet to be revealed. The mornings continued with their ritual, each cup of tea served on the porch accompanied by the sounds of the ocean. Clara took solace in these moments, watching her mother as she gazed out at the horizon. Christine's face reflected the sunlight, but Clara could see the shadows lurking in her eyes. The weight of the impending conversations pressed on her heart, each day a step closer to the inevitable. Clara often found herself in the hidden cove, seeking refuge in its beauty and solitude. The locket rested in her pocket, a constant reminder of the secrets that intertwined their lives. Each time she held it, she felt a sense of purpose, a yearning to bridge the gap that had formed between her and her mother. One afternoon, while collecting shells along the shore, Clara noticed the sky darkening in the distance. The air shifted, the gentle breeze becoming restless, as if the world was holding its breath in anticipation. Clara looked up, her heart racing at the sight of dark clouds rolling in, obscuring the sun's warmth. She felt a sense of urgency. It was a reminder that time was fleeting, that the moment to confront the unspoken truths was drawing nearer. With the storm looming, Clara hurried back to the house, the wind picking up and sending the palm fronds swaying wildly. Inside, she found Christine in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The familiar sense of garlic and herbs filled the air, a comforting presence amidst the brewing storm outside. Clara watched her mother, the way she moved with a grace that belied the fatigue evident in her features. It was a dance Clara had witnessed countless times, yet today it felt different. The storm outside grew louder, the wind howling against the windows, rattling the shutters as if echoing Clara's inner turmoil. She could sense that this was the calm before a tempest, a moment when the world was poised on the edge of change. Clara's heart raced as she contemplated the impending storm, both in the skies and within herself. With dinner served, they settled at the table, the warmth of the meal contrasting sharply with the chill creeping in from outside. The storm raged on, the wind howling like a beast, and Clara could feel the tension thickening the air between them. She watched Christine as she pushed her food around her plate, her eyes distant and unfocused. Clara's heart ached to reach out, to breach the silence that hung like a heavy fog, but fear held her back. As the evening deepened, thunder rumbled in the distance, a low growl that sent a shiver down Clara's spine. She stood, unable to contain the restlessness that had taken hold of her. Stepping outside onto the porch, she felt the wind whip around her, tousling her hair and carrying with it the scent of rain. Clara closed her eyes, letting the gusts envelop her, the storm brewing a reflection of the chaos within. It was in that moment of solitude that she understood the necessity of confronting the weight of their unspoken past. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the salty air mixed with impending rain, and felt a sense of clarity wash over her. The time had come to lay bare the truths that lingered like shadows in their hearts. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Clara re-entered the house, her heart resolute. She found Christine still at the table, her expression reflective and withdrawn. Clara hesitated for a moment, the locket in her pocket feeling like a lifeline, a tether to the stories waiting to be unearthed. Clara stepped closer, her gaze fixed on her mother. The tension between them was palpable, a swirling energy that crackled in the air. She could see the flicker of uncertainty in Christine's eyes, the weight of secrets hanging heavily on her shoulders. The storm outside intensified, lightning illuminating the room for brief moments, casting flickering shadows across the walls. In that charged atmosphere, Clara felt a sense of urgency rising within her. She could no longer ignore the need to confront the past, to unravel the threads that bound them. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the locket and holding it in her palm, the metal cool against her skin. Christine turned her gaze toward Clara, and in that moment, the world outside seemed to fade away. The storm continued to rage, but within the confines of their home, time stood still. Clara held the locket out, her heart pounding as she sought her mother's eyes. In the silence that enveloped them, Clara understood that the storm outside mirrored their own tumultuous emotions. It was a moment poised for revelation, a chance to confront the secrets that had shaped their lives. The air crackled with anticipation, and Clara felt the weight of their shared history pressing against them, urging them to find the strength to face it together. With the rain pouring down in sheets, washing away the dust of the past, Clara and Christine stood on the precipice of a new beginning. The storm outside raged on, but within their hearts, a flicker of hope ignited, promising the possibility of healing and understanding amidst the tempest. Chapter 15. After the storm. The storm raged throughout the night, a fierce tempest that lashed against the island, turning the familiar landscape into a wild, roaring sea. Clara lay in bed, listening to the wind howling outside, the rain pelting the windows with a ferocity that mirrored the turmoil in her heart. Every crash of thunder seemed to echo her unspoken fears, the weight of secrets threatening to suffocate her. When dawn finally broke, the world was transformed. The storm had swept through with relentless power, leaving the air crisp and fresh, the scent of rain mingling with the salty ocean breeze. Clara woke to the soft light filtering through her window, illuminating the remnants of the night's chaos. She rose, compelled by an urgent need to venture outside, to witness the aftermath of the storm. As she stepped onto the porch, Clara gasped at the sight before her. The beach, once a familiar expanse of golden sand, had been reshaped by the storm's fury. Seaweed and debris littered the shore, while the waves crashed violently against the rocks, their energy raw and unrestrained. But amidst the chaos, there was beauty, a vibrant freshness, a renewed promise of life. Clara turned her gaze inland, where the lush greenery of the island glistened, droplets of water clinging to the leaves like jewels. The sun emerged from behind the clouds, casting a warm golden light over the landscape, transforming the remnants of the storm into a breathtaking tableau. Clara felt a stirring within her, a sense of hope rising like the sun breaking through the darkness. She wandered down the path leading to the beach, the sand cool beneath her feet as she navigated the scattered debris. Each step felt like a rebirth, a reclamation of the life that had been overshadowed by the weight of unspoken truths. The ocean roared, but its power was different now, more vibrant, more alive, as if echoing Clara's own awakening. In the distance, she spotted movement, turtles struggling against the remnants of the storm, their tiny bodies battling the force of the waves. Clara's heart raced at the sight, a reminder of the fragile nature of life and the importance of nurturing what remained. Without hesitation, she rushed toward the water, her instincts guiding her as she set to work rescuing the stranded creatures. Clara knelt by the shore, her hands scooping up the little turtles, cradling them with care as she moved them away from the tumultuous waves. With each turtle she saved, a sense of purpose filled her, a connection to the island and its life that pulsed around her. The act became a meditation, a moment of clarity in which the storm's aftermath transformed into a reaffirmation of love and connection. Hours passed as she worked tirelessly, her heart buoyed by the rhythm of the waves and the promise of a new beginning. As the sun climbed higher, Clara felt the weight of the locket in her pocket, a gentle reminder of the conversations that still lay ahead. She realized that, like the turtles, she too was navigating her way through the aftermath of the storm, searching for the light that would guide her home. When Clara finally stepped back, she turned to the horizon, her heart swelling with a mix of triumph and vulnerability. The turtles were safe, returned to their rightful place in the ocean, and she felt a profound sense of accomplishment wash over her. The storm had brought destruction, but it had also unveiled resilience, the determination to fight for life amidst adversity. As she made her way back to the house, Clara felt lighter, the weight of her unspoken fears slowly lifting. The world around her seemed to glisten with newfound clarity, the air vibrant with possibilities. She had faced the storm, both outside and within, and now she stood ready to embrace the next chapter of her life. Inside, Clara found Christine on the porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders as she watched the world awaken. Clara approached her mother, heart pounding with the knowledge that today would mark a turning point in their relationship. The storm had forced them to confront the unspoken truths, and now was the moment to heal, to share, and to reconnect. Sitting beside her mother, Clara felt a warmth radiating between them, a quiet understanding that transcended words. The sun's rays poured over them, illuminating the space with a golden glow that felt like a blessing, a promise that they could weather any storm together. Clara reached for Christine's hand, intertwining their fingers, a silent gesture of love and support. In that moment, Clara felt the power of their bond, the strength of a shared history, and the hope of a future unburdened by secrets. The island, once a backdrop to her conflicts, had become a sanctuary where healing could take place. The shadows of the past no longer loomed as threats, but rather as lessons that had shaped them into who they were. As they sat together, watching the waves roll in and the world around them come alive, Clara felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The storm had passed, leaving in its wake a sense of renewal, a canvas upon which they could paint their future. The locket in her pocket served as a reminder that every story had its challenges, but it was the love that emerged from those trials that truly defined them. And so, in the quiet aftermath of the storm, Clara and Christine began to share their stories, the laughter, the tears, and the secrets that had woven their lives together. Each word spoken was a thread, stitching their hearts closer, creating a tapestry of understanding and love that would carry them forward. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the island, Clara felt a sense of peace settle within her. She had faced the storm and emerged stronger, ready to embrace the life that awaited her, not just on the island, but in the world beyond. The journey ahead was unknown, but she knew one thing for certain. They would face it together, united by the love that had brought them home.